Hey, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Bill Nemitz, who has been away for many weeks. Mm-hmm. He's tanned, he's rested, he's ready to go. And Alan, you're looking kind of tanned.
Yeah,
Alan Caron, our Sunday Insight columnist. Well, we're going through some strange times. The sun disappeared from the sky this afternoon.
Which I saw.
Did you? Good for you.
Compliments of my son, who provided me some glasses.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So
with the safety glasses.
Right.
So. But that's not all that's strange that's going on. We're in I guess like 2 weeks ago, we were seemed like we were on the verge of nuclear war with North Korea, and now that's completely gone out of everybody's mind, and we seem to be on the verge of refighting the American Civil War, and we're going to fight over statues of Civil War personages, and. Were you expecting that's where 2017 would be halfway through?
Well, the common denominator is we keep going from one potential war to another past. It's always about war. But no, I think it's another one of those situations in which, in this case, these monuments have somehow been conflated with history. In other words, the monuments are history. History is the monuments. If you take down the monuments, you're destroying history, which just strikes me as utterly ludicrous. I mean, history is there. History is the story of the human race, and that's not going to change whether you have these monuments up there or not. I think, for example, Adolf Hitler was a huge historical figure. How many monuments have you seen to him? You know, so for the people supporting them to say that this is an attack on history, I think just completely misreads what's going on.
But why do people in Maine care, Alan?
Well, I think
Maine.
the only, I would say, maybe the only real reason that people in Maine care, at least those who are making this argument that we have to preserve history, is really to preserve Donald Trump and the movement that has elevated him. I mean, they're in somewhat, I think, of a panic mode right now on the far right, because this is a big hit they just took. This is the biggest far right gathering in 10 years in America, and it blew up on them.
In a big way.
You're talking about Charlottesville.
Way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, not to be the incurable optimist, but there's a great thing happening not only in the country right now, but in the South in particular. An acceleration of this process that started with, should we really have the Confederate flag over the State House? Mm-hmm. This started some time ago. That has greatly accelerated. Statues are coming down all across the South. University of Texas just took 4 down, mm-hmm. and the president of the University of Texas said, these statues have become a symbol of hatred, of white nationalism, and bigotry, and we're not going to have them anymore. That is a huge transformation, I think, happening across the South in a very short period of time. And it's great news for the country. It's really good news for the South, which has been stuck, large parts of it, stuck in the past for such a long time. Mm-hmm. So,
I think it's also good that the way, I think they did this at Texas, they did this, I believe, in Baltimore, where with very little fanfare, literally overnight, they just move in, take these things down, and poof, they're gone. Because, a lot of what we saw, well, obviously what we saw in Charlottesville and in other places, is the removal of the statue almost becomes secondary to the event that it creates. And by taking these things out quickly and quietly without a lot of fanfare, I think it deprives those who would exploit those situations of the opportunity to turn it into something that's in and of itself historic, such as what we witnessed in Charlottesville.
I mean, I think there is a certain moral high ground to the people who say they don't want the statues taken down because we should confront our history or we should be aware of our history. And I think in another time, in a different context, you could have that argument, and it would be, an interesting discussion to have. But when guys with swastikas show up,
right.
That conversation's over.
Exactly.
You can't really take this long view of history and And the swastika itself is, was once an innocent symbol of good luck in India, and it isn't anymore.
Right.
And you can't
go back.
You can't go around wearing a swastika T-shirt and think you're wishing everybody good luck. There's a historical context to everything, and the idea that history doesn't change. Well, it does. We're constantly reinterpreting history.
Well, I was just going to say
time.
that, especially with these statues. I mean, peel back the layers a little bit and look at what's being celebrated here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis on down, these, in its very essence, these people were dedicated to the destruction of this country as we know it, and at the same time dedicated to the upholding of slavery at a time when at least the people in the North wanted to do away with it. So, I don't see a lot of glory in that. I know that I suppose if I grew up in the Deep South, I'd feel differently. But a lot of the hero worship that goes into these statues, I think is rooted much more in the emotion of the South than it is in the facts of what happened during that terrible time in our history.
Right, and these statues did not go up in 1865 or 1866.
Correct.
They went up in the 1890s and later, when Jim Crow was coming into an effect, and they were they're all in the South pretty much.
Right.
There's not too many.
It's kind of a remember the Alamo thing.
Yeah.
Only
Although,
it wasn't. The Civil War wasn't exactly the Alamo.
We do have a Jefferson Davis bronze plaque, and not even a bronze plaque. I don't know what it's made of. It's some kind of metal plaque in Bowdoin that's apparently being moved. What do you think of that?
I think this is one of those events that it's building for a long time just below the surface. You never quite see it, and then there's one lightning strike that makes everybody rethink everything. It's all been so casual.
Or a small spark.
Small spark, and the spark was Charlottesville. You can trace it immediately and directly to that moment that got everybody's attention and has caused this reflection around the country. I think it's a great thing. This is how big change happens. It builds for a long time, then it happens, it seems like, overnight.
Are you concerned about how partisan it is? I think that the president's response and then followed up quickly by Governor LePage's response to saying that the violence was on both sides, and you can't really distinguish.
I think there's something happening deeper than politics around the country, and that's what I'm focused on. All those guys that have the Confederate flag on the back of their truck, some of them are going to take that flag off, because now that flag isn't about being a rebel and being an outsider and being a resistor. Now it's about being a hater and being a racist. And so I think those are the small things that happen below the political strata that are really important, important. And when you have the University of Texas taking this action, that's worth paying attention to, because there's something happening at the base level of society that's pivoting, rethinking. In large parts of the South, the Civil War is still called the War of Northern Aggression. Right. That fits a narrative that they've built up about how they defended themselves against this great power. I think that's being pierced right now, and now you have to confront that this was a war to protect the dehumanization of other human beings.
I think it's being on the margins. That's true. I do think that a lot of what you saw the president and later Governor LePage do was the same old dog whistle to the same old bass. Just saying what they know those people want to hear. You're right, Alan. What's interesting is to see how many of those people are peeling off. The polling suggests, if you look at particularly the Wisconsin, Michigan, states that Trump wasn't supposed to win and did win, his approvals are now getting south of 35%. So there's some degradation of that support. But clearly, those are the people, the only people, I think, that they care about right now when it comes to how am I going to handle this latest brouhaha. And it's sad, and it's we've been going through this for 7 years now, and Now we're going to be coming up on 1 year of it with Trump, and I don't think it's going to go away. I think they're just going to keep preaching to that same choir.
Right. Well, it won't go away as long as Governor LePage still has his stationery. Right. He wrote somebody complained about his position, and he wrote her a really nasty personal note too. Yeah.
And they both got letters from the Gov. Which I haven't received in years. And what do you got to do? I don't know what happened. I think that Governor LePage and his stationery, which has been going on for a long time. I mean, these notes have surfaced repeatedly, is kind of the prehistoric equivalent of President Trump and his tweets. LePage doesn't tweet; he sits down and jots out notes, misspellings and all. Typically, he would target legislators who, said something he didn't like, but I can't remember specifically what one.
There was one a woman wrote and asked him to resign. He said, "You're from Southern Maine, and all you care about is blah blah blah." And it's just like that's like half the state, Right. I mean, what state are you governor of?
Were you the Northern Massachusetts?
Yeah. And various times people anger him. Troy Jackson got one saying, "Until you've walked a mile in my shoes, do not criticize me."
So what they need to do with LePage, with Trump, it was we got to get his cell phone away from him. With LePage, you got to get his pen and his stationery away from him, because he just seems to have bad nights. And I suspect that's when this happens, when everyone else has gone home and he's going through his mail and he just can't help himself. These things will be collectible someday.
Right.
I guarantee you.
Right.
I mean, Dave Cheever up at the State Archives. I mean, these are public records. He should be trying to get his hands on these.
Yeah. Meanwhile, what an astonishing week or 10 days for Donald Trump. I mean, it's, he's been in a slow descent. He loses the health care thing. He's losing more Republican senators all the time. And then this Charlottesville thing happens, and it's though it was a ripe moment, and I think they're just in free fall right now. And they had that whole 4 or 5 days where you could see, I could see anyway, 3 distinct factions in the White House pulling at Trump, and 3 different statements, all of which had a completely different tone. The one faction being Trump himself and his cell phone. Right. And then Bannon's gone, and now they're going to try the more moderate faction. I think with Kelly is going to try to stick Trump in front of teleprompters for a month, see how that works, and take his phone away.
Well, it worked for a day in Charlottesville, where he came out and gave the statement, and then the next day, this is I spent last week on an island on Lake Winnipesaukee, and I thought, I am getting away from it all. And the Charlottesville tragedy had just happened as I was leaving. And I thought, okay, well, I'm really going to insulate myself from this. The place we were staying didn't even have cable TV. It was over-the-air television. But because we had folks coming to visit us, the world, I mean, I could see how things were still just churning and churning and churning all week. I just don't know where the bottom is here with this president. I don't know how long this can continue before something gives.
There's nothing to compare it to.
No, there isn't.
Really, there's nothing. And the clock is ticking towards the end of the congressional session and the start of the next election cycle. And if he doesn't turn it around very quickly, he's going to find a whole lot of Republicans who are actively disassociating from him, not just asking him not to come to the district, but complaining about him and worrying about him. And you see that happening already. We are already, of course, in the campaign mode. It's astonishing how many major Republicans are saying bad things about the Republican president.
That was also true in 2016. I mean, there wasn't as many as jumping ship now, but there were a lot of prominent Republicans, both in and out of Congress. Susan Collins was one, but a number of others who bailed on him.
It's one thing to do that when he's not president.
Yeah.
It's another thing to do it when he's the leader of your party. He is the president of the United States, and I can't think of a parallel to that anywhere.
I would just point, we've gone on this whole conversation now, and not one of us has mentioned the Russia investigation.
Right.
Which is going on and plodding along.
Tick,
And
tick.
I think what could happen is, even without that, we mentioned how North Korea came and went. The Russians,
right.
nobody's talking about Mueller right now. Even as those things move off stage, he continues through Charlottesville and these other things to burn capital,
And bridges.
and friends and alliances, so that if and when the time comes where Mueller actually starts handing down indictments, the danger for Trump right now is that all these burned bridges, which are really ancillary events, it's nothing to do with Russia, at a time when he really, really needs people to fall in behind him and support him going into a midterm election, those Republicans are going to be really conflicted, because their reflexive reaction is going to be, of course, like they did in the campaign last year, we got to step up and support this guy because he is a Republican and we're Republicans. I'm not sure that's going to play next spring when the first round, if and when the first round of indictments come out, and everybody's already got their eyes squarely on November. So he could be, you think he's isolated now, wait until a year from now. And at that point, you could, I think, for the first time seriously start calling the future of his presidency into question.
Well, the present of his presidency is in question.
Yeah, right.
So
the
future,
I mean, in terms of
not
from
finishing,
office. Right. Not completing his term.
I mean,
right now, I think that's a pipe dream that a lot of people have, and I don't see any evidence right now that tells me he's not going to finish 4 years. But things change so fast and so furiously with this administration that 8 months from now, that equation could be completely different.
This guy is skating on pretty thin ice, I think, right now, in the political sense, not the legal sense. But that ice has gotten amazingly thin under him. And I think you're right. One event that gets the nation's attention, in which it looks, coming out of the investigation, in which it looks like some bad things happen here, and there's confirmation, and you have to then decide whether you trust Trump or you trust Mueller. Right. I don't think that's a hard call for
Paul Manafort.
Or
any of the other people who have been jettisoned.
Look, they already did the trial balloon on getting rid of Sessions. That blew up. Then they did the trial balloon on getting rid of Mueller. That didn't go anywhere. I mean, one of the reasons why it's quiet right now is because they can't get rid of him. They've already tried to see if there was any support for doing that. It's not there in Congress. And in fact, major Republicans have made it clear that it would be a huge mistake to do either of those things. So now that tells me that Trump and company are very worried about this investigation, or they wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think they
wouldn't
are.
have done it. They're very worried. What are they worried about is what we're going to find out.
And I think it's advantageous to Mueller right now for the spotlight not to be on him and his investigation. But just because it's not leading, just because other things are bumping it from the top of the news each evening right now, doesn't mean that it's not progressing.
Yeah.
And I suspect that there are so many. We can now add Bannon to the list of people out there who potentially were once part of the inner circle and now potentially have an axe to grind. The more people you have out there in that posture, the more likely it is, especially if some of those people start looking at possible prosecution themselves, they're going to be flipping like pancakes, and that's when things get really interesting.
But until then, what we're left with is an administration that's made up of generals, stockbrokers, Wall Street guys, and Trump's family.
In other words, amateur hour.
Well, but the generals aren't amateurs.
But they're not politicians, and they're not. I don't think that they're not accustomed to navigating the political currents as they're being expected to do right now. So yes, I mean, in all things defense and to some extent in all things global, it's great to know they're there in case the North Korean kid decides to fire off another missile. But when it comes to domestic politics, I think even the generals aren't really.
Well, I think they'll know enough not to try to be a bigger star than your boss.
That's true.
You know, they'll know things like that, right. And they know about chain of command, and they know about taking responsibility. Could it quiet down? I mean, he's such a wild card himself that it's hard to imagine that it was really Bannon that was fueling all the crazy stuff.
No, I think it's the combination of Trump and Bannon made it particularly incendiary. So I think the generals will have a run now, led by Kelly, and they'll try their best. Congress will go out of Washington. That will help. Everybody will focus on packing as much of the summer as they can into what's left of it. But how do you control somebody as impulsive as Donald Trump, as self-absorbed? Who does that? Who gets the authority to do that?
Ivanka,
maybe.
Ask Adrian Bennett.
It looks to me like Kelly will have control of the staff, but nobody's going to have control of the Donald. So that's a problem.
Yeah,
so
I mean, you're right, because having Kelly be the gatekeeper right now really what it does is it further isolates Trump, and it leaves him more to his own devices than before, because nobody has those walk-in privileges that everyone had before, back in the days of Bannon and Priebus and all these others. So John Kelly, he's the person to watch right now. That iconic photo of him looking down during the Trump Tower press conference, I think, spoke volumes.
It's called Bear said.
48 hours later, Bannon's gone. How much of that can you do? And it wasn't, Bannon became the kind of scapegoat, I think, for what Trump did in that press conference. Trump went rogue. He went off script. He had the script in his pocket. He just played his own thing. And that's what's going to happen. So now you got Bannon left. Next time it happens, who are you blaming then?
That was always Stephen Miller.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
You got to keep a couple of those guys around. Throw him to the wolves when.
At some point, it seems to me it becomes clear to Kelly and others that you cannot control this guy's impulse for self-destruction. You can't.
So like 6-7 months ago, there was a lot of talk that Trump could find some new coalitions and work with Democrats on issues that they care about, and position them in ways where they would have a really hard time not going along and playing ball with him. Is that ship sailed?
That ship was never constructed.
Right.
In my view. It just never got built. How many of these things have we said that, Trump is going to turn the corner, he's going to become a new guy, he's going to act, he'll be presidential. You could go through, you could make an encyclopedic volume of this. A
lot of that was wishful thinking, where, the Democrats for so long were saying, well, we're certain at the very least that we can meet him on infrastructure.
Right.
Well, when was the last time we heard about that?
I believe last week was Infrastructure Week.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it goes back to what we said before. It's become such a toxic presidency right now that even those slivers of chances for alliances and connections that are built purely on pragmatism have been torched by this, because nobody in his party, outside his party, outside of his inner circle, wants to get that close to him. Number one, because it's bad politics. You don't want to be associated with him. And number two, because even if you do negotiate a deal with him, say on infrastructure, there is no guarantee that in the 11 and a half hour, he's not going to blow it up on you. And then you're left to pick up the pieces.
Yeah,
so,
or he won't 2 days later, as he did with the Senate Majority Leader, President, he won't attack you.
Yes, he'll come.
He's your ally today, and then when you lose, he blames it all on you.
So it's just a complete trust void. Nobody trusts him. He doesn't trust anyone. That's not an environment in which you can get anything done, whether it's tax reform, whether it's a return to health. Keep in mind, we've got the debt ceiling crisis looming in September. Even before we get into midterm politics, how the hell are they going to deal with that? That's a month away right now. And we've been down that road before and seen how jittery the markets get the closer you get to not extending that debt limit. And I just have a hunch that that's going to be the next cause célèbre, and it could do some lasting economic damage if they don't work it out.
So you've been on vacation, and you're just back, and you have a column coming up, and that's the worst column.
Isn't
for
it
me.
awful?
It's the first column after vacation is like I'm not mad at anybody. I'm not.
It's like trying to go from neutral to first without pushing in the clutch.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you got for us?
A couple of things. I think I received a couple of emails, as I know the newsroom received many after the whole Mary Mayhew, the federal audit of DHHS, I should say, blew up. And I'm going to be getting in touch with a couple of these folks to hear their stories. I'm also a little bit intrigued by this Poland Spring lawsuit.
Yeah.
Which I got to say, the plaintiffs are right. I mean, this is not spring water.
Right.
In the classic sense. Now, I know that they've twisted and turned the definitions around so that I guess technically and legally it is, but I've always kind of looked.
Where does the lake come from? A spring.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not a big, you're taking all our water. That argument has never really held water for me. But this idea that this is fresh spring water from Maine, and I mean, you can go to any corner of the globe these days, and there's going to be a bottle of Poland Spring water there. It is built largely on a myth, I think. So I'm going to be fascinated.
It's the main brand.
And they settled it last time.
It's like Hillshire Farms. Is that really a farm?
Right. Does that guy really stand out front with the pitchfork?
Yeah.
I mean, so branding is branding and marketing is marketing. But when it comes down to something that essential, that you have the word spring in your name and you're marketing this water, which is coming out. I mean, I could take water out of my well in Buxton. It's no different from the water they're taking out of their well in Hollis. It's the same thing, So I'm going to be fascinated to see how that goes and see how far Nestle wants it to go, because the last time this was litigated, they settled for $5 million or something like that. So my guess is they're going to want to make this go away before it gets any traction. So why not give it a little traction?
There you go. Well, maybe you should do that. Bill's water, Bill's Saco Aquifer water.
Have my water tested?
Okay.
I'm afraid to at this point.
Bill's well.
So we'll be back.
Bill's spring.
We'll come back next week with more new business ideas from Bill Nemitz. This was fun, and thanks for coming.
This is a Press Herald podcast. You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Please email comments and questions to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com. Thank you for listening.